Subscribe to my channel.
What if I told you that hidden in the dusty archives of American military history lies a detailed plan for the invasion of Canada? Not during wartime, not in response to aggression, but a calculated, methodical blueprint for conquering America's northern neighbor. This isn't conspiracy theory or alternative history fiction. This is War Plan Red, one of the most shocking classified documents ever produced by the United States military. While Americans and Canadians today share the world's longest undefended border, enjoying peaceful relations and close cooperation, there was a time when American generals sat in Washington drawing up strategies to march on Ottawa, bomb Halifax, and turn the maple leaf into the 51st star on the American flag. The question isn't whether this plan existed, it's why the United States government devoted serious resources to planning an invasion of one of its closest allies, and what this reveals about the paranoid calculations of global power in the early 20th century. The year was 1930, and the world was a very different place. The Great War had ended just 12 years earlier, leaving nations traumatized and suspicious. The economic foundations of global capitalism were crumbling as the Great Depression spread its misery across continents. In this atmosphere of uncertainty and fear, military planners in every major nation were preparing for conflicts that seemed unthinkable. The United States was no exception, and its target was surprising: the British Empire, with Canada as the primary battlefield. To understand War Plan Red, we need to understand the color-coded war plans that the United States military developed during this period. These weren't casual exercises or academic speculations. They were serious operational plans, updated regularly, that outlined how America would fight wars against various potential enemies. Each nation was assigned a color. War Plan Orange dealt with Japan. War Plan Black covered Germany. War Plan Green outlined an invasion of Mexico. And War Plan Red, the plan we're discussing today, detailed how the United States would wage war against the British Empire, with Canada as the main theater of operations. The architects of War Plan Red weren't fringe military officers or warmongers operating on the margins of power. These were respected strategists at the highest levels of the War Department, working with official approval and government funding. They approached the task with the same seriousness they would bring to planning any military campaign, analyzing terrain, transportation networks, industrial capacity, and potential points of resistance. The fundamental assumption behind War Plan Red was that war with Britain remained a possibility, despite the cooperation between the two nations during World War I. American military planners remembered that Britain had been America's enemy in two previous wars, the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. They understood that international relationships could shift rapidly, that today's ally could become tomorrow's adversary. In the unstable world of the early 20th century, this wasn't paranoia, it was prudent planning, or so they believed. The strategy outlined in War Plan Red was remarkably comprehensive. The plan called for a massive, rapid invasion of Canada along multiple fronts. American forces would strike from Maine toward the maritime provinces, cutting off the vital port of Halifax. Troops would push north from Detroit and Buffalo, driving toward Toronto and Montreal, Canada's industrial heartland. In the west, forces would advance from Washington State toward Vancouver, securing the Pacific coast. The goal wasn't merely to occupy Canadian territory, but to do so quickly before Britain could send reinforcements across the Atlantic. The planners recognized that speed would be essential. Canada's population in 1930 was only about 10 million compared to America's 120 million. The Canadian military was small, and the country's vast geography made defense difficult. If American forces could achieve rapid victories and control key cities, ports, and rail lines, they could present Britain with a fait accompli, making any attempt to retake Canada prohibitively expensive. War Plan Red also identified specific targets for strategic bombing, a relatively new concept in warfare. Halifax, with its crucial naval facilities, was high on the list. Quebec City, Montreal, and other major population centers were designated for potential aerial attack. The plan even included provisions for chemical weapons, though this was not unusual for military planning in that era. One of the most fascinating aspects of War Plan Red was its assessment of Canadian defenses. American planners studied Canada's military capabilities in detail, noting the locations of army bases, the strength of coastal fortifications, and the capacity of Canadian industry to support a war effort. They concluded, unsurprisingly, that Canada alone could not withstand a determined American assault. The real challenge would come when British forces arrived to reinforce the Canadians. To counter British intervention, War Plan Red called for the United States Navy to establish control of the Atlantic approaches to Canada. American warships would blockade Canadian ports and intercept British troop transports. This was an ambitious goal, given the strength of the Royal Navy at that time. But American naval planners believed they could achieve at least temporary superiority in the waters off North America. The economic dimension of War Plan Red was equally detailed. Planners identified Canadian resources that would be valuable to the American war effort, including minerals, timber, and hydroelectric power. They mapped out railway networks that would need to be captured intact to facilitate the movement of American troops and supplies. They even considered how to administer occupied Canadian territory, suggesting that American military governors would need to be appointed for various provinces. But why did the United States develop such a plan? Several factors contributed to this extraordinary exercise in military planning. First, there was historical precedent. Britain and the United States had been enemies within living memory. Veterans of the Civil War, some of whom were still alive in 1930, remembered British sympathy for the Confederacy. The idea of Anglo-American conflict wasn't absurd to that generation. Second, there were ongoing tensions over various issues. Naval competition between the United States and Britain continued even after World War I. Disagreements over war debts, trade policies, and colonial territories created friction. While these issues weren't likely to cause war, they kept alive the possibility in the minds of military planners. Third, Canada itself was a source of strategic concern. Its proximity to major American cities, its control of the Great Lakes, and its Atlantic coastline made it militarily significant. If Britain and America ever went to war, Canada would inevitably become a battleground. From the American perspective, planning for this contingency was simply responsible military preparation. Fourth, institutional factors played a role. The War Department needed to justify its budgets and keep its officers employed doing something useful during peacetime. Developing war plans, even unlikely ones, served this purpose. It kept military minds sharp, tested strategic concepts, and provided training for staff officers. Interestingly, the Canadians were not oblivious to American intentions. Canadian military planners developed their own counter-invasion strategy, known as Defense Scheme No. 1. This plan, created in the 1920s by a Canadian officer named James Sutherland Brown, called for preemptive Canadian strikes into the United States in the event of American mobilization. Canadian forces would attack south,
disrupting American preparations and buying time for British reinforcements to arrive. The plan was never officially adopted, but its existence shows that concerns about American invasion weren't one-sided.
The practical likelihood of War Plan Red ever being implemented was always extremely low. By 1930, the bonds between the United States and Britain were growing stronger, not weaker. The two nations shared language, legal traditions, and increasingly aligned strategic interests. The rise of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan would soon give both countries common enemies that would make Anglo-American conflict unthinkable.
War Plan Red was officially withdrawn in 1939 as World War II began and Britain became America's crucial ally. The plan was declassified in 1974, shocking many people who learned about it for the first time. The revelation that the United States had seriously planned to invade Canada seemed almost comical in the context of the close friendship between the two nations.
What does War Plan Red tell us about international relations and military planning? First, it reminds us that nations prepare for many contingencies, including unlikely ones. Military planners are paid to think about worst-case scenarios, not to assume that current friendships will last forever. Second, it illustrates how historical memory shapes strategic thinking. The Anglo-American wars of the 18th and 19th centuries cast a long shadow, influencing military planning well into the 20th century.
Third, War Plan Red demonstrates the gap between military planning and political reality. While generals in Washington were sketching invasion routes into Canada, diplomats and politicians were building the special relationship between America and Britain that would define much of the 20th century. The military plans existed in a parallel universe, prepared but never intended for use except in the most extreme circumstances.
Today, the idea of American invasion of Canada seems absurd. The two countries are deeply integrated economically, share military commitments through NATO, and cooperate on virtually every significant international issue. The border between them is famously undefended, a testament to mutual trust. Yet War Plan Red serves as a reminder that this friendship, like all international relationships, was built over time and was not inevitable.
The story of War Plan Red also offers insights into how nations think about security. Even friendly neighbors can become subjects of military contingency planning. Even peaceful borders can be viewed through the lens of potential conflict. This doesn't mean nations are inherently hostile or that war is inevitable. It means that in a world of sovereign states, each nation must ultimately rely on its own power to ensure its survival.
For Canada, the existence of War Plan Red was a sobering reminder of the asymmetry in the relationship with its powerful southern neighbor. Canadian security has always depended partly on American goodwill, a fact that Canadian leaders have never forgotten. This reality has shaped Canadian foreign policy, encouraging Canada to maintain close ties with Britain and later to participate actively in multilateral institutions like the United Nations and NATO.
Subscribe to my channel. The classified invasion plan of 1930 remains a fascinating footnote in North American history, a reminder that the peaceful world we inhabit today was not always guaranteed, and that the calculations of power and security continue to shape relationships between nations, even when those nations appear to be the closest of friends.